Hello there, I am Joe Crimson, and today I want to talk about my Super Nintendo childhood. I've mentioned before that I grew up with the Super Nintendo. I was born in 1997, which means that by the time I was old enough to properly play video games, the GameCube was already about to be released. But my father happened to have a Super Nintendo, with a bunch of games, which is where my interest in video games got its start. At the time I would sometimes feel a little jealous that other kids would have GameCubes and I still had the Super Nintendo from 10 years ago. But in hindsight, I wouldn't change a thing. The Super Nintendo is to this day the system where my heart lies and where a lot of my favorite games of all time are played. And thanks to the local toy library, I got to play Nintendo 64 and GameCube quite a bit. So child me really had nothing to complain about in the gaming department. But let's get back to the Super Nintendo now. We had quite a bunch of games when I was a kid, and I want to talk a little bit about as many of them as I can in this video. We will talk about how I got introduced to these games and what my first experiences with them were like as a kid. I do want to make a little side note here before we get started, and point out that there will be a lot of big Super Nintendo hits that won't get mentioned in this video. I want to really focus on the games that I actually had as a kid today. So even though I played most of the big titles later in life anyway, they will be missing in this video because I never had them as a child. And with that, let's get going. There's no better way to start than with the first game I've ever played, Super Mario World, which in my childhood went hand in hand with Super Mario All-Stars. A bundled version with both of these in a single cart existed, but we had them separately. Both of these games are huge contributions to my personal love of platformers, and really, I don't think there's a better place to start when it comes to that genre. I admittedly wasn't very good at any of the remakes featured in Super Mario All-Stars when I was a kid. Truth be told, my skill is still a bit lacking in these games. But Super Mario World was really where it was at. We would play this game together quite a bit at home, and as a result, it ended up being one of the most played Super Nintendo games. Not only for me, but for my parents as well. Even to this day, Super Mario World is a game that I pick up very regularly, to the point where I also enjoy trying out ROM hacks of this game every now and then. In the end, I don't think there really could have been a better way to introduce me to not only the Super Nintendo, but to gaming in general. Let's move on to a trifecta of sports games that I really enjoyed as a kid. Super Soccer, Super Tennis, and Super Hockey. Sports games generally aren't that interesting to me. These three get a bit of a pass, since they essentially were the first ones that I ever got to play. And I had a lot of fun with all three of them. Super Soccer I would play with my father quite a lot as a kid. I would usually lose, but it was a 5-year-old playing against a 35-year-old, so that was to be expected. I always found the names they used for the players in this game funny. I think these are supposed to be inspired by real-life football players, but I don't know enough about football to really tell. Super Tennis was one that I would play on my own a bit more. As a kid, I would always go into the circuit mode and lose every match on purpose, because I found the animation of you getting thrown out of your house at the end pretty funny. Don't get me wrong though, I did actually try to get a good result at the circuit mode as well, but as a kid I wasn't exactly skilled enough to really get anywhere. And then there's Super Hockey. This game is known in the United States as NHL Stanley Cup, but to me it will always be Super Hockey, which makes it fit here perfectly as a little trifecta of super sports games. I was never great at this game either, but I still had a lot of fun with it. I particularly enjoyed that you could cheese all of the matches by scoring a quick goal and then hiding behind your goalie. Since we're in the sports realm right now anyway, let's talk about the one racing game I had as a kid, F-Zero. This is to this day hands down the best racing experience on the Super Nintendo in my opinion. Granted, there might be a little bit of nostalgia bias factored in there, but that's just a small detail, right? Everything about this game really resonated with me as a kid. The fast pace went hand in hand with how I like to play most games, and the soundtrack is simply amazing. Back in the day, I could never really get past the Queen League, unfortunately. I think this can mostly be contributed to the fact that I didn't really understand how to properly use the sliding mechanic as a kid, but nowadays I feel like I'm a bit better at it. As an introduction to the racing genre, I feel like this game did a pretty good job at it. I honestly wish there were more games like it in this day and age, but I can always come back and visit this classic whenever I want, which helps. This brings us to what may be the greatest trilogy in gaming, the Donkey Kong Country games. These are some of the most beloved games on the system, and rightfully so. When I was a kid, we only owned Donkey Kong Country 1 and 3. Thanks to the toy library that I mentioned earlier, I was able to play Donkey Kong Country 2 as well. Back in the day, we had this little thing at home where the first game was the one that my father liked, and the third game was the one that I liked. Granted, I really enjoyed all three of them. The third one was just my favorite. I would play it so much that I eventually knew all the bonus barrel and DK coin locations from memory. I always loved how each level felt like it had its own little unique gimmick. DKC1 I'd always have a lot of fun with too. Even as a kid, I found it impressive how realistic this game looked, compared to other Super Nintendo games. And the music in each level really made me feel immersed in the environments. I admittedly wasn't a huge fan of Donkey Kong Country 2 as a kid though. In part this may be because I played it the least, due to not actually owning it, but it's also the hardest of the three and I wasn't able to beat it until later in life. It wasn't until I was an adult when I really started to appreciate this game for the masterpiece that it is. But still, even as a kid, this trilogy was pure unfiltered magic to me, and it's among my most fond memories of growing up with the Super Nintendo. Next I want to talk about two shoot-'em-up games that I had as a kid, Axlay and Poppin' Twinbee. These games aren't exactly similar, other than the fact that they're the same genre, but due to them being the same genre, they always went together in my mind as a kid. Especially since they both had that little Konami intro screen that I became very familiar with at the time. There's a lot of big opposites with these games. Axlay is the hard one, while Poppin' Twinbee is the easy one. Axlay has a very serious and grainy presentation, while Poppin' Twinbee is more happy and silly. But both of these games were a lot of fun for me as a kid. Axlay had a particularly great soundtrack, which I loved listening to, though admittedly I was never able to finish this game as a kid. I could get to the final boss pretty consistently at one point, but I would always end up getting a game over in the end. It was only a couple of years ago when I finally defeated it. Poppin' Twinbee I was able to finish back then. It also helped that it had a 2-player mode, which allowed me to enjoy it with others as well. In the end, these were both games that I enjoyed a ton. And if you made child me choose between them, I probably wouldn't be able to. In fact, I probably wouldn't be able to pick a favorite nowadays either. Next up, I have a little rapid fire of games that I don't really have a huge amount to say about, but that I still played as a kid and wanted to give a little mention to in this video. Goof Troop often gets described as multiplayer Zelda. That's honestly how the game felt to me as a kid. Though I will admit, I ended up playing solo more often than the multiplayer mode. I still enjoyed it though. Starwing was another fun one, but as a kid, I was only ever able to play the easiest route. Because of this, I ended up not really playing it as much as most other games. Killer Instinct and Brutal Paws of Fury were the two fighting games I had as a kid. I played Killer Instinct at a friend's house as a kid, and I really wanted to have it myself, but my parents didn't want me to play a game that had so many blood effects in it. So I ended up getting Brutal Paws of Fury instead. Though in hindsight, this game ended up being fun as well, and I probably wouldn't have known it if it wasn't for this little story, so it ended up being a win-win. Finally, we have Pac-Man 2, The New Adventures. I only played this game through the toy library, which meant I never paid a lot of attention to it as a kid. I did always find the ways you could mess with Pac-Man funny though, so I would boot it up every now and then just for that. With that, we move on to the next game that was a bigger part of my childhood, Super Castlevania IV. At the time, this was one of my favorite games on the system. Well, it still is really, but that aside, I feel like this was the first game ever where I felt like I was able to conquer a proper challenge. This is not an easy game in the slightest, and child me struggled with it quite a lot. After tons and tons of failures, finally beating this game felt like I conquered the world when I was a kid. I had a big tendency at the time to just give up and stop playing when I couldn't beat a challenge, but this game somehow kept me motivated to keep trying until I finally won. It helps that the level design, enemy design and soundtrack in this game are top notch. I will add, finally beating such a difficult game after so many tries helped motivate me to try and conquer all the other gaming challenges that I faced as a kid. The motivation that Super Castlevania IV gave me brings us to our next game, Super Ghouls and Ghosts. This game is notorious for how unforgiving it is, and rightfully so. There are moments in this game where the game can just decide to take you down no matter what. But I was a persistent child, and after seeing not only my father, but multiple family members and friends being unable to finish the second loop while using the bracelet, I said to myself, I'm going to be the one to do it. And lo and behold, I did. It took a very long time for me to finally beat this game. In fact, it took years of my childhood, but I did it, and it felt amazing. And in the long run, this game ended up becoming one of my favorite games of all time, to the point where I even started speedrunning it, and got a tattoo inspired by it. As infamous as this game is, for childhood Joe Crimson, it doesn't get any better than this. There's another game on the Super Nintendo that took me a long time to figure out, but just like Super Ghouls and Ghosts, when I finally did figure it out, it ended up becoming an all-time favorite. This game is Illusion of Time, known in America as Illusion of Gaia. My first experience with this game was a bit odd. I didn't really know any English yet, so I had no idea what all the characters were talking about. Because of this, I had no idea what I actually needed to do, so all I did was just randomly running around South Cape, with nothing actually happening. It wasn't until a few years later into my childhood when I started to get a basic understanding of the English language, which helped me figure out how to actually go anywhere in this game. But little did I know that I was in for a ride that would stick with me for a lifetime. Once I was able to properly get this game going, I loved every single second of it. The story was unique and the gameplay was really fun, and once again very similar to Super Ghouls and Ghosts, once I finished this game I felt like I had just experienced one of the greatest things I ever would. And this ended up becoming another game that I loved enough to get a tattoo inspired by it. Again, just like Super Ghouls and Ghosts. We have one more game to look at today, and this is the one that possibly left the biggest impact on me out of all of them. This is of course The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. This game was my introduction to the Zelda franchise, which is now my favorite gaming series of all time. A lot of my initial moments with this game ended up being me running around the map cluelessly. But even with my very limited English knowledge, I still always ended up figuring out what to do and where to go. And when I finally got the Master Sword and defeated Aghanim, Child me once again felt like he conquered the world. And then it turned out that I wasn't even halfway through yet. But this didn't bother me in the slightest, because that only meant that there was way more game left to enjoy. This is truly the game that has contributed the most to shaping me into the gamer that I am today. Those experiences I had with it as a kid got me hooked forever, and honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. And that concludes this little summary of how I grew up with the Super Nintendo. We ended up talking about a total of 20 games in this video, varying across all kinds of different genres. I honestly had a really fun time looking back at these years and reminiscing about all the games that I had so many good memories with. What consoles and games did you all grow up with? I'm sure many of you have a lot of similar stories like the ones I've told in this video, and I would love to read all about them in the comments below. Childhood memories like that last a lifetime, so every now and then it's good to take a step back and look back into these years and reflect how it has impacted your later years as well. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, subscribe, and join the mosh pit in the comments. For now, thanks again for watching, and I will see you guys again later. Goodbye.